My mother looked at my plain white dress, scoffed and said, "You're marrying a glorified grease monkey. This wedding is an absolute embarrassment to our family." My father, a high-ranking state senator, refused to even walk me down the aisle, warning me that my impulsive decision would ruin his political career and our family name. They thought I was ruining my life by choosing a humble garage mechanic over the wealthy elite suitors they had lined up for me. But as the minister pronounced us husband and wife, I looked at my parents' cold, snobbish faces and couldn't help but laugh. I whipped out my phone, typed a quick message, and sent them a single photo of my new husband in a uniform they never expected to see. Within 30 seconds, my father's face drained of all color, and both of their phones started ringing in a total panic. My name is Hannah. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life wasn't really mine. It belonged to my family's reputation. Growing up as the only daughter of a powerful, long-standing state senator, every aspect of my existence was curated for public consumption. My mother was a high-society socialite who measured a person's worth entirely by their net worth, their family crest, and the brand of watch on their wrist. In our house, love was conditional and appearance was everything. For years, my parents mapped out my future. They had a short list of wealthy, well-connected suitors lined up for me, arrogant trust fund heirs and ambitious young politicians who looked great in photo ops but lacked a single drop of genuine warmth. But I refused to play their game. I wanted a life built on truth, not political theater. And then I met Daniel. Daniel was everything my parents despised simply because he was real. When they asked what he did for a living, I told them the truth. He owned and operated a modest auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. To my mother, that made him a glorified grease monkey. To my father, it made him a complete waste of time. They couldn't see past the calluses on his hands or the oil smudges on his work jacket. They didn't care that he was kind, brilliant, fiercely loyal, and treated me with a gentle respect I had never experienced in my father's house. When Daniel proposed, my parents' subtle disdain exploded into an open war. My father pulled me into his study, his face flushed with rage, and issued an ultimatum: break off the engagement immediately and marry a man of our standing, or face total disownership. No inheritance, no family backing, and complete social excommunication. They thought the threat of losing their money would bring me to my knees. But I looked my father dead in the eye, handed back my emergency credit card, and walked out the door. 6 months later, our wedding day arrived. There were no country club ballrooms, no ice sculptures, and no political donors holding champagne flutes. Daniel and I chose a quiet, sunlit park on the edge of town, surrounded by cheap wildflower arrangements, folding chairs, and a handful of true friends who actually cared about our happiness. It was humble, simple, and entirely ours. My parents didn't show up to support me, they showed up to make a point. They arrived late, pulling up in my father's sleek black town car. My mother stepped out looking like she was attending a funeral, wearing a bitter sneer that didn't fade for a second. As she walked toward the small seating area, she didn't bother hiding her disgust. She picked up one of the simple paper programs, glanced at it, and tossed it onto an empty chair like it was garbage. "Look at this tragic setup," she whispered loudly enough for Daniel's family to hear, her voice dripping with venom. Synthetic lace on the dress, cheap grocery store flowers. She traded a life of royalty to play house with a mechanic. What an absolute embarrassment to our name. My father stood beside her, his arms crossed, staring at the small altar with cold, calculated contempt. He refused to sit down. He refused to talk to Daniel's parents, who were warm, humble people who had welcomed me with open arms from the very first day. When the time came for someone to walk me down the aisle, my father stood motionless in the back, forcing me to take those steps entirely alone. As I passed him, his eyes locked onto mine. He didn't offer a smile, a nod, or a single tear of joy. Instead, he leaned in slightly and delivered his parting words in a harsh, icy tone. "Your impulsive decision will ruin us," he muttered, his voice laced with threat. "You've made your bed, Hannah. Don't you dare come crawling back to my office when you're bankrupt and realized you threw your life away for a nobody." I felt the prickle of tears in my eyes, but I swallowed the pain, turned my back on him, and looked at Daniel waiting for me at the altar. Little did my father know, the man he called a nobody was about to rewrite our entire family dynamic in less than 60 seconds. The ceremony ended, and as the minister pronounced us husband and wife, my parents stood near the edge of the park, preparing to make a dramatic, disdainful exit. They wanted everyone to see them leaving early, proving just how beneath them this entire affair was. But before they could reach their car, I pulled my phone out from the hidden pocket of my wedding dress. I tapped on my father's contact, attached a single photograph, and hit send. The image wasn't from our wedding. It was an official military portrait taken just 2 weeks prior at a classified briefing in Washington, D.C. In the photo, Daniel wasn't wearing an oil-stained work jacket. He was standing tall in a pristine dark blue military dress uniform, his chest covered in high-tier commendations, silver stars, and joint service medals. Standing right beside him, with an arm around his shoulder, was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Daniel wasn't just an auto shop owner. That humble garage on the edge of town was actually a specialized, heavily secured research and development facility for advanced military vehicle defense systems. Daniel was a decorated Special Operations Commander and Defense Intelligence Liaison, who ran the entire operation under top-secret security clearance. He preferred a quiet, modest life, which is why he never bragged about his rank, and why I had respected his privacy until this exact moment. Across the lawn, I watched my father pull his phone from his suit jacket. My mother leaned in over his shoulder, expecting to see a smug text from her ungrateful daughter. Instead, as the image loaded, the color instantly drained from my father's face. His jaw went slack, and he stumbled backward a step, staring at the screen in utter disbelief. My mother's eyes widened in sheer horror as she recognized the high-ranking generals and defense officials standing beside the man she had just called a glorified grease monkey. Before my father could even process the image, his phone began to vibrate violently in his hand. Then my mother's phone rang. It was the senator's primary political backer and the chief lobbyist for the defense committee my father chaired. They weren't calling to congratulate him on his daughter's wedding. They were calling in a total panic because they had just received an urgent security clearance update, notifying them that Senator Vance's new son-in-law was the primary intelligence director overseeing the very defense contracts my father's entire political career depended on. The arrogant smile on my father's face was completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. My father's phone didn't stop ringing. He answered it with a trembling hand, his voice cracking as he tried to respond to the furious defense lobbyist on the line. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw the sheer panic in his eyes. He realized in an instant that the man he had just publicly humiliated held the absolute power to single-handedly destroy his political career, revoke his committee access, and terminate every major endorsement keeping his re-election campaign afloat. My parents didn't make their quiet, dramatic exit. Instead, they turned around and practically ran back across the lawn toward us. The cold contempt on my mother's face had completely dissolved into a desperate, fake smile, while my father looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine. "Hannah! Daniel!" my father called out, his voice unnaturally loud and dripping with a sudden sickening warmth. "Wait. We didn't get a chance to congratulate you properly." As they rushed up to the small altar, my mother tried to throw her arms around me, pretending to tear up for the benefit of the remaining guests. "Oh, my sweet girl," she gushed, her voice shaking violently. "We were just so overwhelmed with emotion earlier. You know how your father gets when he's stressed about work. We are just so proud of you both." My father stepped toward Daniel, extending a hand that was visibly shaking. "Daniel, son. Why didn't you tell us? A Special Operations Commander. Director. We could have hosted a magnificent gala in Washington. We could have brought in the national press." Daniel didn't take my father's hand. He stood tall in his simple suit, placing a gentle protective arm around my waist. He looked down at my father with a calm, piercing gaze that had stared down real threats in active war zones. "Senator," Daniel said, his voice quiet, steady, and utterly lethal in its composure. "I didn't tell you because my duty isn't about grand galas or photo ops. And frankly, if a man's respect for another human being depends entirely on a title or a rank, then his respect isn't worth having in the first place." My father stood frozen, his hand still hanging in the air, completely silenced. My father tried to salvage the situation, stuttering out excuses about how he had always wanted what was best for me, but Daniel and I had seen enough. I took my husband's hand, turned our backs on my parents, and walked away into our new life, leaving them standing alone in the middle of an empty park. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. Daniel didn't have to launch a personal vendetta or make angry speeches. He simply did his job. When my father's Senate committee came up for security clearance renewals and defense budget allocations, Daniel filed completely honest, objective reports detailing the senator's questionable ethics and lack of discretion. Without Daniel's endorsement, my father lost the backing of his biggest defense donors. Within a year, his political leverage evaporated, and he quietly announced his retirement from politics to avoid a humiliating defeat in the primary elections. My mother's high society friends, quick to smell blood in the water, slowly drifted away, leaving them isolated in the vanity they had spent a lifetime building. Meanwhile, Daniel and I built a home based on what actually matters. We expanded the auto shop, turning a portion of it into a community training center for young veterans transitioning back to civilian life. I learned that true family isn't defined by bloodlines, titles, or luxury. It's built on respect, loyalty, and standing by the people you love when nobody else is watching. Looking back at that day, I don't feel anger toward my parents anymore. I just feel grateful that I had the courage to choose my own path. They thought they were shaming me at a cheap, embarrassing wedding, but in reality, they were watching the moment I gained total freedom. Now I'm curious about your thoughts. What would you have done if you were standing at that altar? Have you ever had to choose between your family's expectations and your own happiness? Comment your story down below. And let me know what city or country you're watching from so I can see how far our story has reached. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.